Hey, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to the first Sunday night bourbon talk in months. It has been a busy few months. Been out there trying to sell the Midnight Kingdom, History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. Been running around the country. Hopefully, I've met a few of you here and there. It's been delightful. Everyone is very, very kind. Cheers. That's good. Yeah, been out there trying to sell the book, trying to talk to people, trying to organize some stuff, working on some projects here and there, starting research on the new book, which is always fun. Had a big long day of research today. Felt good. Absolutely drink gin. Drink whatever you want. Drink water. Whatever you want to do. Eat your food. Have a sip, or don't have a sip, whatever you're doing. Just hang out with some good people on a Sunday night. Talk about politics, descent into demagoguery, and the likes. I haven't been to DC yet well, no, that's not true. The book launch event was at Politics and Prose. Had a really good time doing that. Politics and Prose, one of the best bookstores in the world. It's a red shirt. It may look orange, but I'm in a red shirt. It's interesting the way these things come across. It has been too long since we've done this. That is a mistake that I would like to rectify. I'd like to get back into the habit of doing these. I always walk away feeling good and fulfilled. I have a bunch of questions tonight that I'm really looking forward to. Have not been to New York City on the book tour yet. Would like to do that. Like to get up there, maybe go to Brooklyn. Always enjoy going to Brooklyn. Pictures over my shoulder. Eugene V. Debs, the Hoosier himself, who ran for president from a prison cell, one of America's greatest citizens of all time. And this is Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. Really, really great, beautiful thinker. I recommend both. I have not been to Toronto. True story. I've only been to Canada one time. That was when I was, I believe, 20 years old. Went up to Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is basically just America. Went up there, gambled, made a bunch of money, and then lost it immediately. At which point I realized that I don't need to gamble. Then I went out and drank, which is what you do when you're under 21 and you happen to be in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Was walking back to the place that I stayed, watched somebody throw a couch off of the top of a building. Crazy, crazy stuff. So again, here we are. Very, very happy to be here. Relieved to be here. Want to get back into the habit of doing these things. There's something going on right now in American politics. Well, there's a lot of things happening in American politics, but there's a great somebody asked over on my Substack. I did a mailbag this week. Somebody asked about demoralization. There's a malaise that is lingering over the American body right now. There's a lot of reasons for it. Of course, I got a bunch of questions about the debt ceiling debacle, which we'll talk about in just a second. That I think was a punch to the gut for a lot of people to watch. I don't know, the American and world economy possibly completely and utterly undermined for, I don't know, S's and G's. But also just the general political setup right now, the feeling of alienation from power and representative government. People are not looking forward to the prospect of a Biden-Trump rematch for a lot of different reasons, nor do they want Ron DeSantis particularly to catch momentum, which we'll talk about tonight. They feel generally as if their vote counts to a certain extent, but there isn't a lot of forward momentum, which is one of the larger problems that we've got going. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, as we always do. But there is a feeling right now that we are alone and that we are powerless. As I always say, those are the ingredients for authoritarianism, not just because authoritarianism offers a way out. It offers you the ability to feel as if there are other people on your side. So you are part of a large, dangerous group, but also that you can exert power. They offer the ability to change things. It just so happens that the change is self destructive, suicidal, and retrograde. Those moments and those feelings of demoralization, that is a really dangerous thing, particularly when we are at the place that we are now. And it's counterintuitive, right? It's really, really counterintuitive because you have a reason to feel demoralized right now. You have a reason to feel alone and powerless because of the way things have been, because of the alienation from power. But those are the moments where you have to summon within yourself from reserves, from resiliency, you name it. It isn't always your job to get back off the floor, but you still have to get back off the floor. I understand it. I feel it. I know it. I'm frustrated too. Hell, I'm pissed off watching people I love get hurt, watching people suffer, watching the environment get worse and worse for vulnerable people like gay and trans people, people of color, immigrants. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. It hurts to watch them not be represented. It hurts to watch them being basically fed into the maw of an authoritarian movement. It's so frustrating. This is one of the reasons I saw over in the chat people talking about mental health a little bit. This is one of the reasons why my political approach and my analysis and a lot of the work that I've been doing is now tinged with mental health and psychology because it has to be. Because one of the things that's happened in this country, and by the way, somebody just said this happened in the UK. You're absolutely right. This is what has happened in the Western liberal democracies. We have reached a crisis of meaning. We've reached the point in which we're not so sure why we did this. We're not so sure why we did what we did in the post World War II era. We're not so sure why we built these things. They seem hollow. They don't seem like they have a lot of meaning to them, particularly now in this hyper capitalist era in which, I don't know, people are being absolutely skewered. There's no humanity in it. It's an anti human thing that is happening. And with every single day, what do we see? It's in the news, it's in the air, it's in the zeitgeist. It's anti-human progress, or at least anti-progress, whatever you want to call it. AI, exactly. Artificial intelligence is anti-human. This is one of the reasons why every time I think about it, every time I look at it, every time that something comes across my social media feed that's created by this thing, it makes the humanity in me recoil in horror. It's it's really, really sad to watch it happen, to watch this whole thing now get drugged down into this anti-human hyper-capitalism, neoliberalism, in which like the things that we care about, the things that matter to us, the things that carry meaning are being destroyed and cannibalized and repurposed and just absolutely sucked of any humanity that they had in the first place. I posted on Twitter, and again, there's another thing. It's like something that like mattered to some people, like all of a sudden just got absolutely butchered in the pursuit of not just profit, but anti-democratic energies. But I posted on Twitter, I said, one of the reasons why AI generated art bothers me so much is because why it's being done, it's for profit, but it's also for addiction. It's so that there's something on. It's so that there's something we can watch. Meanwhile, what's being obscured in all of this? What happens is we're obscuring that there are real human beings with families, with jobs, with fates, with futures who right now are on strike. The people who create entertainment, the people who create art, they have no idea where their next paycheck will come from. On top of that, and this is something that I suffered through, and a lot of people that I care about and love, parts of my community. I grew up as a writer. That was the community that I was a part of. We have sucked the humanity out of all of it. We have turned all of this stuff into a profit-driven mode. And by doing that, we've sucked anything remotely human about it. Do you know why I write? Do you know why I put things out in the world? As a flare to shoot up in the dark night of the human soul to say, here I am. I hope you recognize it. I hope there's somebody else out there like me that I can connect with. What we're looking at now is a future that is stripped of all those parts, and all that is left is the ether. All that is left is something to make us feel alone, but also to salve the pain of being alone. We are being subjected to one trauma after another. We are being subjected to one abuse after another. We are being subjected to an anti-human world right now. And it's only going to get worse because the profit motive in this system is built around that anti-human profit incentive. Because capitalism got off its leash, if it was ever on the leash in the first place. People think that they're in charge of it, but no, they're riding on the back of it, trying like hell to sustain themselves. So yeah, it's brutal out there. But the last thing that we can do, the last thing that we can afford to do is to let it go. That demoralization is real, that malaise is real, that feeling of powerlessness, that alienation from power is real. It's only going to get worse until we pick ourselves up off the floor. I'm sorry about that. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we would have stopped this thing dead in its tracks before you or I ever walked on this earth. I wish that we would have stopped the speeding up that took place in 2016 up until now. I wish that we would have gone ahead and pushed for something different. I wish past revolutions would have succeeded. I wish that somehow or another we could have curbed this and found a better way already. I believe that the moment right now is full of it. It's ready. The ground is fertile. I believe that. But that demoralization, that alienation from power, it is totally understandable. We just can't afford it. And I'm sorry. I wish it was time to take a rest. But my whole point, coming on here, doing these things, seeing you, seeing your conversations, seeing you connect, seeing you come together, it means the world to me. So thank you for coming out. Cheers. All right. On those themes, let's get to the questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll just kind of go back and forth. I hope you're well. I hope wherever you are, whenever you're watching this, I hope you're well. I hear that classes watch this. I hear that students watch this. Young people watch this. Keep the faith. Keep fighting. This first one comes from Chris C. My question is a two-parter. One, does the Biden team honestly think that people don't care that he caved to Republicans by forcing cuts to SNAP benefits and forcing a pipeline through with the buzzer? Two, do you see these neoliberal trends depressing turnout in 2024? First part, no, I don't think that Biden or his administration thinks that people are going to particularly care about this because the environment that we are in is such a fast moving turnover environment that something like this is going to get lost in the shuffle. Same way that achievements do. We basically have a goldfish society at this point when it comes to politics. Things change every single day and they change multiple times every single day. Also, by the way, the Democrats have a monopoly over the votes of the people who would care about this. The Democratic Party is going to continue to cultivate and harvest the votes of the people who do care about these benefits being cut or the Republicans being capitulated with. Like, there is no one else for them to vote for now. Are they going to go to RFK Jr.? No. My God, no. They're not going to go to Marianne Williamson either. There is no viable alternative to Joe Biden right now, just as there is no viable alternative to the Democratic Party either. This whole thing is eventually going to have to change with outside pressure, the likes of which we saw, of course, with the Tea Party, which again was an astroturf movement by, right-wing libertarian billionaires. That's not going to shift until there is pressure on them. When it comes to this stuff, they don't care. They don't care if people are screaming at them, "Hey, do something about Roe v. Wade. Hey, do something about voting rights." They don't care, like, if you're upset because they haven't necessarily listened to your concerns, your valid, legitimate concerns. Same thing with benefits. This is why they're not afraid to go out there and say, "Hey, this is a victory. My God, we rolled the Republicans on this one." Why? Because they're not talking to you. They don't care what you think about this. They don't think what you care about the deal that was made to raise the debt ceiling. That right there, oh, we rolled the Republicans. We won that deal. That is for the Beltway press and the Beltway community. That's for donors. They do not care what the average voter thinks of what they're doing at this point. So, no, Biden and them, they do not care about any of that. Second, do I see these trends depressing voter turnout? I got to tell you, if we get Joe Biden versus Donald Trump 2, I gotta tell you, I think we'll still see a lot of people going out to vote, but I would not be shocked if turnout goes down, particularly as Joe Biden's entire campaign promise in 2020 was that he was going to be the person to not just defeat Trump, but absolutely make this crisis end once and for all. That hasn't happened. A lot of people have become disillusioned. A lot of people have started checking out. They've said, "I can't care about this politics anymore. It hurts me." And I understand why it hurts them. There will be people who vote against Trump if Trump is the nominee. There will be people who will vote against DeSantis if he's the nominee. But we are probably going to see turnout possibly go down. That is a possibility in all of this. Christie says, "Will the Trump indictments hurt him or help him?" If they don't have anybody else to vote for either, I don't see, like, Republicans turning away from him either. They're not going to, grow a conscience. They're gonna vote for him the same way they voted for him in 2016 and 2020. In fact, I think some of these indictments will actually help him with his base. They'll say, "Hey, look what the deep state's doing. I wanna support this guy." It's brutal. I hate it. And it's funny, I was talking about Eugene V. Debs running for president from prison. Like, if Trump were in prison in 2024, and I don't think he will be, but if he were, I think they would still vote for him. I think his vote tally, I think it would be pretty much the same if he was in prison or not in prison. And that's a horrific thing. That's a legitimate question to ask, like, would that affect any of this? And the reason is that they're not they're not thinking about it the way that we are. They're not thinking about it like, "Oh my god, I can't believe what Donald Trump has done," or like, "Wow, this is absolutely disgusting." In their mind, they have to square the circle. In their mind, they have to figure out the way to vote for the person they wanna vote for, and by the way, the cognitive dissonance of that, they will throw it right out. The research that I've been doing for the new project on the psychology of the right-wing mindset, it's unbelievable. But their ability to go ahead and square that circle, it's unparalleled. They do not care if he's in prison. They do. I mean, it could be him caught, I don't know, audio-wise saying, "I committed a crime," and it could just be, black and white, and it would not matter, which is exactly what's happening right now. He recorded himself admitting that he had violated the Records Act and, had classified material that he had stolen. I don't know if middle ground Republicans would or would not vote. I would love to think that they wouldn't, but I think they'll go along with it. It's such a terrible, terrible environment. Terrible, terrible environment. Nate says, "I've heard you talk about how the president isn't as powerful or important as some people believe. Can you talk about that? When did it start? What's the history there?" Well, so in a lot of ways, one of the things that we see with Joe Biden, and I think this is one of the defining characteristics of his presidency. And by the way, this was also one of the defining characteristics of Barack Obama, was a look around saying, "God, I wish I could do something more, but I'm restrained by what's around me." The federal government has been intentionally undermined by those same right-wing libertarian billionaires that I talked about, those donors. Those people have absolutely just destroyed, um, any ability of the federal government to really do anything besides lower taxes on them, to bail out their businesses, and maybe declare war in order to open up new markets. That's pretty much all that's been left for the federal government to do. Um, so as a result, the federal government has been depowered. One of the things that has happened in all of this is, I would go ahead and say, historically, post World War II, the American presidency was incredibly powerful, but it reaches a point almost of automation. And by the way, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about things like the quote unquote deep state. One of the reasons why that conspiracy theory of the deep state, the idea that there are all kinds of non democratically, non elected people who are in control of what happens, it's true. It's not a satanic cabal, it's not anything like that, but it is a group of technocratic elites who do run these things without ever once being elected. You will never know most of the names who are absolutely most consequential to you. Because that administrative state grows along with the growth of the United States as the hegemon, particularly in battling out the Soviet Union with the military industrial complex and so on, you start to have a bunch of these agencies and institutions and forces and private interests that are suddenly like really exerting pressure on the presidency and on the government. Eventually, you look up, and Richard Nixon, by the way, was one of these people who looked up in the 1970s, and he basically said that this thing, it's like a runaway machine. There's nothing I can do. He felt one of the most powerful modern presidents, Richard Nixon, felt powerless in trying to control the apparatus of the American government. That's what happens. That's what happens as the administrative state grows. Eventually, of course, you have a lot of people who are, sort of they're sort of trying to make it through this. Reagan was basically a figurehead. H.W. Bush was sort of a bloodless CEO. Bill Clinton, of course, was had his own sort of centrist neoliberal sort of ideas and was pushed by the market and forces and such. George W. Bush was maybe the last most powerful president. That Unitarian executive idea that he could just start a world war and basically declare war on anybody or kill anybody they wanted to at any given moment, that was sort of the apex of the powerful imperial United States president. And eventually, what ends up happening is that with the collapse of the economy in 2008, that sort of gets washed away. And so what ends up happening from the 1980s into the early 2000s with 2008 is all of that progress that happens as America is on the up and up, like as it's making money, as it's growing in power, as it goes up and up and up, like you start to see that we're not going to be able to do this stuff anymore. Eventually, neoliberalism is going to need these social safety nets cut. It's going to need all of the goodies that are given to citizens, all of the rights, all of the privileges. Those things have to be taken away. And that's not popular, right? I mean, Barack Obama ends up becoming president and looks around and is like, we got to keep this machine going. I'm sorry, this isn't great, but we got to do it. We have now reached the point where the United States presidency is not all that powerful. In fact, it's largely a representative position. Donald Trump was resentment and aggrievement and anger of the white American. At this point, Joe Biden sort of represents the grieving of what has happened. Sort of represents like looking around and saying America's still great, but also I think maybe we're losing something now. The neoliberal hyper-capitalist age has absolutely destroyed federal ability to do much of anything, to the point where it's kind of identified more by what it can't do. Mitch McConnell is one of those, um, was one of those, lions of the Senate that actually was more powerful because he kept things from happening. And so as a result, like, we've reached this point where a president sort of stands up and has one half of the country hate him because they're not on his party, and they believe that he's a puppet or, whatever it is the "Let's Go Brandon" crowd wants to tell themselves. And then on the other side, it's a bunch of people who say, "Why don't we do something better? Why don't we try something better?" And then it's the president's job to tell them why we can't try new things or why we can't move forward and do new things. As a result, it's just kind of the person in the dunk tank. It gets people all riled up, and it gives them a feeling of having power, which is what Donald Trump was all about. He made people feel like they had power, even though they were absolutely getting screwed by him and everybody else. It's it's really brutal what has happened, and that alienation from power that I started talking about, like, that's where that's at. Like, even in some of the higher echelons, it's, it's tough. It's really, really tough. Steve says, I'm trying to figure out how the Republicans can sign off. This, by the way, is thematically the same. Can sign off on a near Xerox copy of the Democrats' 2022 budget. I don't mean to minimize the cuts that were made. If you're a 52-year-old who gets food stamps, they're very significant. But $6 trillion is a lot of money. And if they're cutting a billion or two, that's a few hundredths of 1%. And does that mean we're no longer arguing about the remaining 99.99%? Chris Hayes said this shows the Republicans have given up on the most basic questions of political economy. What do you think about that? Absolutely. The Republicans have no foundation. They have no platform. Back in, I think it was 2020, they just didn't put a platform out. Like, that was not just like, oh, weird thing they forgot to do. It literally represented where they're at. They have no principles. They never had, but they've given up even the ability to even express something. What ended up happening in this debt ceiling situation, and I just said, the president in large ways is sort of a representation of these feelings. The Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, has no actual power. Like, yeah, he sits in a room with the president and negotiates, and eventually this gets passed because the other party passes it. The Democrats were the ones who put that deal over the finish line. The Republicans could not be expected to do it. He couldn't wrangle the votes. Matter of fact, I mean, like, what, 15 rounds it took for McCarthy to get the speakership in the first place. What's more, the Freedom Caucus and the other members of the Republican Party, they wanted to default on the debt. They had no ideological goal. There was absolutely nothing that they were trying to achieve. They were trying to express the anger of a constituency that doesn't understand what's happening, doesn't know why their lives feel the way that they do. All they have is anger and resentment and grievance. That's it. They get told constantly, that there's a liberal elite. They get told that it's gay people, trans people. They get told it's black people, it's immigrants. They keep getting a finger pointed around, and they keep getting told these stories that activate their feelings from their Christian background or their communal backgrounds. That goes ahead and fills them up with racial or economic anger, you name it. And the whole point of all of it is to give them a story that doesn't actually get them on the right path to understand what's going on. By the way, that is one of the main through lines of the Midnight Kingdom, if you haven't read it yet. Meanwhile, these representatives of the Republican Party, they don't have an agenda. They literally don't have an agenda. They literally do not have an ideology that they're following. They'll do whatever's necessary, including, white supremacist bills, anti-trans bills, trying to default the government. All of that is based on their feelings that something isn't working right. And as a result, they want to basically, it's like having a DVD player and slapping it when it doesn't work. Just slap it and see if it starts working. They have nothing else. Nothing else. So as a result, this budget or the debt ceiling deal that got pushed, the win for Republicans was this: it hurt people. That's it. That was their win. Their win was that a lot of people out there are getting money that they shouldn't. They're not even asking to get the money themselves. They don't expect it. They've lost any expectation that the government or that their party or that their leaders, that any of them should actually help them. They've actually just given up on that altogether, which is one of the reasons why Trump is like such a dream to them. He can go ahead and tell them that they're winning. That's it. That's it. Alexander says there's a Democratic president who's totally fine with the situation. That's what I said leading into this whole thing. Our representative politicians, the Republicans are the one who represent the cruelty of the market. They are the ones who are going to make sure that we're retiring at a later age. They're going to take away the social safety net before it's all said and done. It's the Democratic move, the Democratic Party's move to say, "Oh my God, I don't want to do this at all." It's terrible. It's terrible, this thing that they're doing. And then eventually they have to meet in the middle because they will capitulate to it. It is the expression of the American mind, particularly of the powerful American mind, the people who have money and influence and power. That's what ends up happening. I would come to Alabama in a heartbeat. I know a lot of people down in Alabama. They're good people. Lauren T. We'll be there, Jared. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Can you talk? By the way, real fast, Leslie says the constant capitulation is maddening. Yes, it is. That's why we have to elect new people, because that's who they are. The Democratic Party gives you metaphorical resistance. They'll say, they'll kneel during the Black Lives Matter thing. They'll go ahead and say the things that make you feel like you've got someone fighting for you. It's the veneer of resistance to this stuff. Meanwhile, what are they motivated by? It is what the market wants. That's it. They are there to go ahead through neoliberalism, by the way. Neoliberalism is the consensus by which both parties have operated by. The difference now is that the Republican Party is moving into a neo-fascistic authoritarian way. But all of this it's not just a capitulation. It's a tandem. It's professional wrestling. Oh, we're fighting. Pay money to see us fight. Meanwhile, they're not actually fighting back on this stuff because the market requires them not to. The way that this system has to shore itself up, neoliberalism is entering into a crisis. Either it's going to give way to a new order or it's going to shore itself up by getting rid of things like minimum wage. I've told you now for years that they were going to start using child labor, and now we're there. They're going to get rid of any safety precautions, any safety nets, you name it, in order to make this thing work. As a result, it's not just capitulation, it's a dance back and forth. It doesn't mean that the Republican Party isn't more dangerous. They absolutely are. They are an expression of the authoritarian mindset of the American public and also the authoritarian mindset of the economy. They are absolutely more dangerous, and they are getting more dangerous every single day as the neoliberal system requires them to. And the Democrats are going to continue to say, oh my God, I wish we could do something about it. And artificial intelligence is going to make that worse. I would love to do something about it, but the algorithm, I don't know. I really wish. Lauren, can you talk about the recent debt deal and how you think it will actually impact student loans? It looks like student loans are going to be back starting in August, which is an absolute shame. They should wipe that free. I can tell you as a former professor, but also as somebody who has dealt with student loan debt, I can tell you right now that that was a sham. That was a crime and a fraud perpetrated on generations. That should be wiped out. But it will come back in August. They're making it harder to go ahead and pause them, which is also a crime. Uh, Absolute fraud and sham. It's what happens when you have a monopolized economy where like you can charge people whatever you want to go to college because you got to go to college and do that. Now we're seeing the backlash to that because what's happening now is we're actually going to see more people not going to college and getting jobs that aren't going to require that, particularly as we reindustrialize because of the new Cold War. We can't manufacture things the same way we have because of the new Cold War with China. So as a result, that colleges and universities are in trouble. Degrees are going to lose. Um, I'm looking at this. I'll answer that in a second, Andrew. So as a result, yeah, it was an absolute fraud. Awful. Awful. Lisa says, what will it take when people will take to the streets like France? I don't know. I have a belief that as this thing gets worse and worse, we're eventually going to see, a lot of democratic pushes, small d democratic pushes in terms of protest and being in the streets. I happen to believe that. But that being said, like, the problem here, going back to AI generated content, is how much people are addicted to, to content. How much they just wanna sit and watch things and not think about things, which is what happens when you're depressed. It's what happens when you're traumatized. It's the same thing as people who get addicted to alcohol or drugs or self-destructive behaviors. It's people trying to disassociate, trying not to think about what's going on. We have a country that knows that things are bad. We know that America is in decline. We know that climate change is an existential apocalyptic crisis. We understand that. We understand that there is a democratic crisis going on. The problem in all of this, and by the way, I have to tell you, deep down under the layers of denial, I think even a lot of the MAGA folks know it. A lot of the Republicans know it. The ones who will tell you that climate change isn't real and all that, they know it. They know all this stuff is happening. But guess what? You can go ahead and sort of like push that out of your system and numb yourself out and disassociate by using drugs, alcohol, self destructive behaviors, streaming too much, not paying attention to things, joining a cult like MAGA, joining an authoritarian movement. These are all ways that people deal with these stressors. It's rough. It's really, really rough. It's awful. Kirsten says, how do you think deep fakes and the new voice fakes will impact the 2024 election? The voice fakes over the phone are really hard to tell. Have you seen the Nixon fake announcing the crash on the moon and death of the astronauts? It's scary realistic. I have not seen that. Um, I have to tell you, I think that this election is going to be defined by things like that, by artificial intelligence, artificially created content, videos, images. I think it's moving so fast. I'm going to read the next question and loop this in. Jane says, my question, do you think DeSantis has a chance of becoming the next president? Well, so here's one of the things I wrote about in the mailbag on my Substack. That's jaredsexton.substack.com. It's yeah, absolutely. The Russians and their vodka and the downfall of society and also the authoritarian regime that they had to put up with there. Absolutely. That is what happens. And it's one of the reasons why America is in the midst of a mental health crisis right now. It's one of the reasons why we're more depressed than ever and we're suffering all of these problems, is because the situation is deteriorating. So the question is, do I think that DeSantis can be president? I said, over dispatches from a collapsing state, I said, you know, he is not a good politician. He's really, really bad at the stuff that we usually think about what makes a good politician, going out there, being able to talk to people and do things. Um, but that doesn't matter in a society like this one. That's something for you and me and pundits and reporters to talk about. There's already so many generated things out there. Like, his videos are already full of it. His website's already full of these artificially created things. The question is, can DeSantis go ahead and take over Trump's control of the MAGA base? The only way that that happens is if there's some sort of shift in reality. And I gotta tell you that, like, artificial intelligence and these hall of mirrors that we have getting set up, that is a perfect situation for someone who's not popular and not talented, but is backed by every major donor who, by the way, hates Donald Trump and doesn't want him to be the nominee. Like, I could see things getting weird. I don't think it's a coincidence that DeSantis announced his campaign with Elon Musk. I don't think it's a coincidence that Elon Musk is like absolutely platforming people like Tucker Carlson and the new right, who is ready for DeSantis, and they want an authoritarian like him to take over from Trump. I don't think that any of that is accidental. So I have to tell you, I think that AI created content, forgeries, deepfakes, whatever. I think that this is going to play a huge role in 2024. And if DeSantis is able to catch fire and able to gain momentum in all this, that will be part of it. I think that's going to be one of the defining things of this election. Speaking of the election, Jason says, "Is Manchin going to run for president as a no party, the no labels party? There isn't enough bourbon for me to accept what that could do. The cycle is going to be a shit show." Yes, there is potential for Joe Manchin to run. He is so obviously obsessed with the idea of running for president with the no labels party. For those who don't know, who haven't heard me and Nick talk about it and some of the things I've written about it, the no labels party is not an independent party. It's not a third party. It's none of that stuff. It is a corporate driven greed party that is trying to put together all these moderates. And by moderates, what we're actually talking about are people who are bought and sold by corporations and the wealthy, including Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, Larry Hogan, you name it. But Joe Manchin is their guy. I could very well see him running for president in 2024. I do think it would hurt Joe Biden. Again, going back to what I was saying about AI-driven forgeries and the like, that is the type of thing that could go ahead and get someone like a Ron DeSantis over the line. I don't think they want Donald Trump. But a lot of these things can come together. I still tell people Ron DeSantis is a very, very dangerous person. For those who don't know, by the way, lawyer at Gitmo during that whole thing was there as they tortured people. Like that, this is, you could not custom order a worse authoritarian for this moment. And the way, and I told everybody this too, I said they're going to start leaning into the militarism, the veteran part about it. I see it happening already. It's already taking place. It is going to be very weird. But yeah, I could see Joe Manchin running. It's obvious that somebody is in his ear. This no labels party has got his imagination and his attention. Yeah, I could see him running. Harry says, "I saw where you had mentioned getting harassment from evangelicals for the Midnight Kingdom. Have you heard from any that appreciated it? I'm a Christian. I almost hurt myself from nodding while reading it." Yeah. For those who haven't read it, The Midnight Kingdom is the story. It starts with the merging of Christianity and the Roman Empire and sort of goes throughout history talking about conspiracy theories and misinformation and how these ideologies have forwarded anti-democratic ideas and hurt people all the way up to the modern era. People don't like that. People don't like talking about how the Catholic Church was instrumental to everything from slavery to colonialism to, just absolute genocide. It's true. That is what happened. A lot of people have gotten mad at me for that. A lot of people have said that the Midnight Kingdom is an anti-Christian, anti-Catholic book. That's not what it is at all. Any ideology, when merged with power, is going to become corrupted and is going to be corrupted in a way of trying to forward and promote that power. That's just how it works. It doesn't matter if it's Christianity, it doesn't matter if it's Islam, it doesn't matter what it is. It gets corrupted by power and profit. I'm sorry, but if you look around right now and you don't see Christian nationalism, neo-fascistic Christianity, if you don't see white supremacist Christianity gaining power and hold over these people, I don't know what to tell you. But that also isn't what is at the heart of this thing. I keep saying this, when you see these churches where kids are being abused, and it's everywhere, and it's always been everywhere. It's that corruption within these things, and they need to be called out. I have had a lot of Christians reach out and say that they were really relieved to read the book, that they needed to know the story, that they needed to understand how this thing came about because they are trying to reform their churches. They're trying to reform their communities. The white evangelical system has been so corrupted that people look at it now and they say, "What in the hell is this? This doesn't represent me. This doesn't conform with what I believe. I think that this is disgusting." So I've heard now with the Midnight Kingdom, I have heard from a lot of Christians who are trying to reform their churches. I've heard from them who are trying to reform their communities. They feel like they can create something that honors what they believe to be Christ's teachings. A lot of them, by the way, happen to think that they were socialist and deep down, or that they were about acceptance and actually offering redemption and healing. They happen to believe that that's the way that this stuff should be treated, and instead it's been bastardized. But of course it has. Of course it has. So no, it's not an anti-Christian book. It's not an anti-Catholic book. It's an anti-bastardization book. It's an anti-corruption book. It's an anti-abuse book. It's an anti-imperialism book. It's an anti-white supremacist book. An anti-white patriarchal supremacy book. And I'm sorry if that offends people. If you are offended by a book that advocates for small d democracy and for people to live better, safer lives, and you find that to be somehow or another anti who you are, guess what? You're on the wrong side of it. You should probably ask yourself why you're on the wrong side. PK Wild. It seems the American people who would be pro-democracy are complacent or passive in the setting of this fast-moving fascist movement. What concrete actions do you suggest to overcome this inertia and make a difference? So, this is something I've been talking about a lot lately, and I got to tell you, when I bring this up on a podcast, somebody was talking about Danielle Moody earlier. Danielle Moody is one of the few people that I've talked to on a podcast about this, and was like, "Yeah, no, that's true." Most people get very scared when I start talking about what I'm getting ready to talk about. And that is this. Many of white liberals in this country who resisted Donald Trump are not actually going to fight against neo-fascism. They fought against Donald Trump. They thought he was disgusting. They thought that he represented something ugly and awful, which they were right. They also thought that he represented racist America. True. They also thought he represented an anti-democratic America. True. They thought he represented a dangerous person, a dangerous movement. Absolutely, he did. But as I keep saying, Donald Trump is a symptom and not the disease. A lot of these people, unfortunately, white liberals in America, are not interested in dealing with the disease. And here is the reason why. Because that disease serves them very, very well. By the way, SJ, thank you for telling me to take a drink. I appreciate that. The disease serves them well because a lot of these people, and they mean well, they don't want to serve racism. They don't want to serve misogyny. They don't want to serve an imperial agenda. They don't want to do any of that stuff. In fact, the very idea that they participate in anything that hurts anybody, it hurts them to their core. Many of them are in therapy because they're dealing with the guilt of being a part of that thing. But meanwhile, and by the way, this goes for journalists, this goes for politicians, this goes for a ton of white liberals in this country. They are being served by the very things that Donald Trump represented. The thing they didn't like was that Donald Trump embarrassed them. They didn't like that Donald Trump made them feel bad. They didn't like that Donald Trump represented the parts of themselves that they didn't want to think about. What has to happen in this country is that there has to be a grassroots movement that stirs something in people to their better selves, to a change, to something different that makes them believe that maybe on the other side of this change, maybe they could risk their wealth. Maybe they could risk their positions of power. Maybe they could risk their influence and affluence. Maybe they could. And maybe it would be okay. And maybe it would even be better. I read a quote today, doing research on something, and said, and I'm terrible. I can't remember who said it. It was a child psychiatrist. The quote was, and I'm going to butcher it, the quote was, "Some people prefer the certainty of misery over the misery of uncertainty." And that is so damn telling. They literally can't imagine risking themselves and risking what they have. They can go ahead and say, "I'm anti-Trump." They can go ahead and say, "These are my principles." When push comes to shove, are they willing to risk and gamble what they have? And again, researching the Midnight Kingdom, writing the Midnight Kingdom, what I found is in all of these fascist Nazi countries, all of these authoritarian states, it is a white, liberal, middle class that always goes with them because they're like, oh my God, things are getting really scary. I would love a strong man to go ahead and take care of this. This is one of the reasons why you have Reagan Democrats. It's one of the reasons why these people cross the aisle, is because deep down, what matters is not the principles that they espouse. In this house, we believe in this. Here, we believe this. Resistance, resistance, resistance. Those are easy to say. There's nothing on the line. In fact, the way that this country is set up, particularly with our jobs, with the economy, you get points if you are more aware than other people, if you care more. Because what happens in this country is that you have a lot of people who have learned to talk out of one side of their mouth, say, hey, we are here for gay and transgender people, particularly corporations, particularly people who have a lot of skin in the game. And on the other hand, they're like, oh God, I don't actually care about any of that shit. I wish those people would just stop. I don't want gay and trans people to get hurt, but quit putting it in people's faces. Back off a little bit. You know, if you could just back off, maybe we could make a deal here. Maybe we could figure things out. The problem here is that there has to be an alternative that makes these people feel like maybe the world would be better and it would be worth risking their power, their influence, and their affluence. It can happen. But it's a hell of a job. We have to build a grassroots movement. It's the only way we can do this. Lauren says, perfect timing for me to open up this bottle of Old Forester 1920 I bought yesterday. Hey, cheers. It's a good bottle of booze. Can you talk a bit about the Stop Cop City movement in Atlanta and the escalation this week with the arrest of 3 activists from the Solidarity Fund? Absolutely, I can. I've been meaning to talk about Cop City for a while. Should have talked about it on the podcast already. Should have talked about it elsewhere. The problem is that it's just a big, giant mess. What I'll say is that the Stop Cop City movement is a beautiful thing. It is a grassroots, true movement. It is trying to stop the creation of this absolutely authoritarian institution. And one of the reasons that this is happening is to go ahead and push a larger law enforcement footprint, the equivalent of an occupying army in the United States. As neoliberalism, hypercapitalism, and growing authoritarianism, and by the way, again, to make this point clear, because I never want to leave anybody behind, it might sound redundant, but I want to make sure that people understand this. Neoliberal hypercapitalism requires that you're going to continue to shrink what people have and you're going to make their lives more precarious as you need to make profits grow. The system requires this. On top of that, we have now reached a point in which there is such historic inequality that you can't even hide it anymore, right? In the past, you could cut a little bit here and you could hurt that person over there. By the way, Scott says it's the Democratic leadership of Atlanta doing this. Absolutely, it is. The Democrats play a huge role in the pushing of law enforcement and also the military industrial complex. They're the ones who go ahead and say, yeah, no, the Republicans have a point on all that. Keep pushing. That's what I was talking about in terms of the capitulation and also the veneer of resistance. Of course they're doing that. Scott Adams in New York isn't an aberration. There are so many Democrat leaders who are like this. This is part of the role that they play. To go back to what I was saying, the neoliberal economic system is in crisis. It needs more authoritarian elements that are going to continue to destroy the progress of the 20th century. That's the only way that this thing is going to square the circle and move forward. As that happens, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that people are going to get fed up. That people are going to start going out in the streets like they are in France and attempt to say this isn't okay. They can't, they know that this is happening. As a result, This is why they're buying so much in surveillance. This is also what artificial intelligence is about. They are replicating the surveillance state and the police state that China has. Maybe even trying to one up it. They're buying the same machinery and the same technology that China has used. They keep calling this a nightmare totalitarian society, and they look at it and they say, "Yeah, absolutely. That's what we want." They're doing it in preparation for squeezing us even more, for taking away even a semblance of what we have. They understand that people are gonna get pissed off about that, understandably. And this is always what happens when these big, giant, powerful, wealthy nation states, when they contract, when they have to take away those things, when they have to take away rights, they have to take away liberties, they have to take away any amount of safety that people have, they automatically invest in law enforcement and surveillance in these institutions that are supposed to police them. Cop City is not going to be the last of these things. We already have a law enforcement that is outfitted with the weapons of war. They have all of the leftover goodies from everything from like the Persian Gulf Wars to the Cold War. They have all this stuff at their disposal. It's only going to grow. The surveillance is only going to get worse. And by the way, all of this stuff that's happening in Cop City, this is where people are putting their feet down. This is where people are saying, "No, we don't want this." And it's happening largely in the dark. It's not getting covered, it's not getting talked about, it isn't gaining a lot of traction because it's not gonna make it on the evening news. It's not something that people like talking about, but this right here is where you put your feet in the dirt and you say no, because you have to stop it before it graduates into worse and worse and worse oppression. It's getting worse. And it has to. It absolutely corresponds with the counterbalance of how neoliberal hypercapitalism requires this authoritarian push. It has to. Has to. And one of the things that we found, you look at the Cold War, you look at this back and forth between the United States and the Soviet Union. One of the things Okay. Susan, I'll answer that in just a second because that's a really, really important question, and I'm glad you asked it. So, what we found during the Cold War is when you're engaged in this dance of death with another culture, like America was with Russia, you become more like them and they become more like you. You cross pollinate cultures. One of the things that's going to happen as the Cold War with China gets worse, and by the way, as globalization starts to shrink back, and we have to start having factories, which is where, by the way, the underclass is going to work and toil for basically nothing with no protections. We're going to have a rerun of industrialization, which was gross, by the way, which is also why the child labor was obviously on the docket during all of this. You're going to see the authoritarianism that is already in place in China start to rear its head here and grow and grow and grow. Susan asks, okay, dumb question here. It is not. Why do the neoliberals need to take it away? There aren't any other options. There is. There are other options to make all of this work. The way that all of this could work is you could tax the wealthy a little bit. Eventually, in capitalism, it reaches a point in which there's too much money on one side and not enough on the other because trillions of dollars were redistributed starting in the 1980s. And what happens there is eventually it reaches a point where it just doesn't work. You can't make a system work when there's not enough money and not enough resources. People can't buy stuff. Like they just can't. Eventually, you could go ahead and redistribute some of that money. You could go ahead and tax those things and make sure that the government works and it can provide services for people. But the way this thing works and has always worked is you cannot cede any amount of ground on this stuff. You simply can't. You can never allow yourself to be taxed. You can never have any of that sort of power taken away because the mindset is perpetual growth. Whatever happens today, whatever happens this quarter, you have to grow next quarter. There is no way whatsoever to back down. There's no way to degrow. Of course, there is, and it works, but in the mindset of the people who are carrying this stuff out, it's impossible. This could get fixed if you just started taxing the wealthy and corporations. Could, but they will not allow it. And they have gained so much leverage over the system through corruption and over this historic inequality, they can't allow it to happen. And that's where we find ourselves at this moment and why there is such a crisis. We're coming up on 1 hour. It's where we finish. Well, I I'm finishing my drink and then I'm pouring more. Appreciate y'all coming out. This is always great. I'm getting fired up. Good questions all the way around. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Cheers to everybody to a better future. I enjoy these things. I need to do more of these things. I keep saying it every time I come back after a couple of months. I always kind of have this moment, self-doubt where I'm like, nobody wants to do this. Nobody's interested in watching me drink bourbon and ramble and rant. Maybe I should. Feels good to talk about this stuff. I do the podcast, I do the writing, I do all that stuff, but also it just never feels like I get to work this stuff out enough. I don't know. Something to think about. I got 2 questions here about the investigation. I'll read them both and then answer them together. Echantix, I believe that's how that's pronounced. Is Special Prosecutor Jack Smith running cover for Merrick Garland's hesitation to hold Trump accountable under the Espionage Act? How much more evidence do they need? My question. I think the name of the person is my question. Does Jack Smith have the authority to charge Trump with whatever crimes he uncovers, or is AG Garland still a potential roadblock? Is Smith making charging decisions like a prosecutor or findings or recommendations like the Mueller report? I am not particularly sure about the charging stuff, but I have to tell you, and this never makes me popular. A lot more money in simply saying, they got Trump's on the rope. They're getting him. I keep saying he is a wealthy white man, not just a wealthy white man, but also a wealthy white man who is the former president of the United States of America. If they charge him, I don't know. Erica says she thinks he submits to Garland. I think that's probably right. I think Garland has the final say. Garland is an institutionalist. And I will be shocked if he's charged. This is also one of those things that it's hard to explain to people what's happening. Like, obviously, he got documents or whatever, but you have also reached this point. I mean, it was like within a week of that, we found out that Biden had documents, Pence had documents. By the way, how about Pence running for president? Woo! That's going to be a tough campaign. Whew. What a weird election this is going to be. But if I had to put money on anything, I'd put all my money on him not getting charged. I could see him getting charged in Georgia. I could see that happening. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to him. I don't know that he's necessarily going to get held accountable, but I would put more money on something happening in Georgia than I would happening with the documents case. I think the Jack Smith thing seems much bigger. I mean, obviously it's federal. Obviously, Jack Smith has been turned into the newest messiah of all of this, the new Comey, the new Mueller. Yeah, I don't I don't see him necessarily getting held accountable on this thing. Wish he would, but I don't see it happening. Do I think that Garland is running out the clock? I think that the worst day of Garland's tenure was the day that any of this stuff landed on his desk, including the January 6th stuff. He has no desire to hold a former president accountable. He also has no desire to go ahead and make an arrest that could be seen as political. These people have no interest in upsetting the apple cart. And one of the things that I think we need to understand and gets lost in a lot of this. We see it as an us and them, right? Like there's all these people on this side who are against Trump, and then there's all the Trump people. But that's not how this stuff works. Most of the people in Washington, D.C. are on one team, and that team is the wealth class. That team is taking care of themselves. They have differences of opinion in terms of how the wealth should be used, but, you know, that's it. They're not really interested in holding each other accountable unless it's somebody, like a George Santos or whatever, some interloper. And they see Donald Trump as an interloper, but they're not interested in holding a former president accountable, unfortunately. Fortunately not. Namus says, any impressions to share about this guy, Matt Walsh? A family member seems to be drawn to him, and I find it alarming, but can't find a way to express it. Yes, Matt Walsh is absolutely disgusting. A repulsive human being who is profiting off of spreading anti-trans, anti-gay ideology, and it is awful. He is he's one of the more disgusting figures out there. His ability, RH says, a total ghoul. That's a great way to put it. He is someone who is capitalizing off of these culture war things. And I talked about this on the podcast with Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes made his money and made his platform as being the guy who's willing to say Nazi things. Other people would, sort of intimate Nazi things, and Nick Fuentes is like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. I'll talk about that. That's totally fine. But Matt Walsh has figured out, like, I'll go the extra step. I'll go ahead and say these anti-gay, anti-trans things. And by the way, somebody said total misogynist. Absolutely. Like, what these people are pushing for is they literally want to reverse any progress that feminism has created, any equality that's been put there. They literally want to go ahead. They want to roll back divorce rights. They want to roll back domestic abuse protections. They want to go ahead and create a retroactive, reactionary, anti-woman, patriarchal society, which is what all these people are actually obsessed with. And they're going to do this like any way that they can. That has been one of the massive, massive pushes in all of this, is trying to reverse all of that progress. And Matt Walsh is disgusting. If you have a person in your family who is interested in Matt Walsh and is watching Matt Walsh stuff and listening to him, talk to that person. See what's going on. And don't talk to them about Matt Walsh. Talk to them about themselves. What's going on in their lives? Take an interest in that as long as you feel safe. Oh, absolutely. The age of consent is one of the things that's absolutely happening. As they're saying children are being exploited, they're trying to move the age of consent back because they're trying to reinstitute this patriarchal society. You'll notice they give themselves up sometimes. They'll get in the middle of one of these conversations on one of their podcasts or one of their live streams, and all of a sudden they will start having a discussion where they're starting to be like, man, I don't know, maybe once a girl gets her period, she should be allowed to marry. And it's like, oh, I see what's happening here. You're saying the children shouldn't be exploited, but now you're advocating for the exploitation of children. And why? Here's something that I keep finding in my research, which is really interesting and something to remember when you're paying attention to modern politics. The right wing mindset, the right wing authoritarian mindset works this way. When you were young and you're being taken care of by your family, particularly if you are in a strict household, whether or not it's just a patriarchal household or an evangelical household, one of the things that you learn is that whatever is forbidden, whether it's, you know, your sexuality, your personal gender preferences, your feelings about the world, your feelings about women, your feelings about any of this, you learn that you have to suppress whatever it is that would cause you problems within the home, whatever it is. And when you repress that, a couple of things happen. And by the way, this is around everywhere. When you repress that, there's only two things basically that can happen. I'm sorry, 3. 1 is you're tortured forever, and you don't understand why you're tortured. You don't get it, but you live a life of just constant pure anxiety and self-hatred. 2, you realize what has happened, what it is that you have repressed within yourself in order to fit into that family and that community, and eventually you embrace it and you find true happiness and you find yourself, you find your place in the world, you heal. Or 3, by repressing it, you project it onto the rest of the world. You start looking for that shadow self everywhere else. There's a reason why so many of these people who are out there saying that the liberal elites, satanic cabals, are trying to hurt children, or trying to abuse children, why they keep getting found to have horrendous materials, why they keep getting found out that they have hurt children. It's because as they are screaming about this being out in the world, what they are doing is they are projecting their own self-hatred and the things that they have repressed. They are putting it out on the rest of the world. And they are looking for it, and they're trying to destroy it. The right-wing authoritarian mindset is completely and utterly defined by projection. It is an unwell movement. If you have somebody in your family who is being drawn to Matt Walsh, or someone like Matt Walsh, Nick Fuentes, whoever it is, talk to them if you can, if it's safe to. Be there for them. Don't talk about politics. Just be there for them as a person, if you can. Good luck with that, because that's awful. Kate says, historically, has there ever been a country as far along down the fascist freeway with our corporate oligarchy, inequality, institutionalized racism, general greed, and sociopathy amongst our leaders that averted the collapse into fascism or civil war? The United States, baby! The United States was really in danger of fascism after the Great Depression. We like to hide that history. You can read the Midnight Kingdom. You can read American Rule. It was really bad. Before the New Deal went ahead and quelled the rise of masculine fascism in this country, before the attack on Pearl Harbor led to the mobilization effort, which put a bunch of people to work in the war effort, until it changed the focus and the target of our anger, America was really, really, really in danger of exactly this. And the corporate oligarchy that we're talking about, they were right there with the fascists, the same way they were with the German Nazis and the Italian fascists, same way they were in Spain with the fascists there. The industrialists, the oligarchs, all of those people, which, by the way, another moment of historic inequality and historic corruption, they were absolutely ready to create a fascist push in the United States of America. Everything from the America First Committee. You can look at someone said the business plot, which is one of those things nobody wants to talk about. The fact that all of these oligarchs were attempting to overthrow the presidency and carry out a coup. The United States of America was very far down the highway. Also, by the way, you want to talk about the racism, you want to talk about the sociopathy, like they they absolutely they, the Nazis and the fascists took a lot of inspiration from us. They everything from our eugenics to our apartheid state again, between whites and blacks. So the United States of America has pulled itself out of this abyss before. We're going to do it again, but it's a different thing now. And by the way, it would help if we understood actual history and we understood how things actually worked. But there's a reason why they want to scrub history books and they want to ban books. It's exactly for that. All right, got a few more. Pro-sanity, anti-fascist. Is there any return of investment for protesting outside county GOP offices? I'm in a district formerly rep by Fred Upton. Local parties gone MAGA Q, nobody calling them out. Our Dem party is AWOL. These are nasty Republicans. I will say protesting outside of the offices might not necessarily have that much of a return of investment. It'd probably feel good to go ahead and tell them what you think about them. I wouldn't tell you not to do that. If your local Democratic Party is AWOL, I got bad news for you. You should become the Democratic Party. You should become the resistance. This is obviously something you care about. Talk with other people in your community. Find people who think like you. Find people who care. Start building alliances there. It doesn't even have to be within the Democratic Party. It can just be local communal aid. You can start coming together. If you want to demonstrate outside these offices, as a group, that might not be the worst thing. But yeah, find the other people in your community who feel like you. That's how we're going to build this movement. It's going to take one connection at a time. Blake, after you finish writing a book, do you learn something new about yourself as a writer through the subject matter you've written about? Absolutely. I always tell people A book isn't complete until you've changed. The amazing thing about it is over the course of writing a book, because it takes a while to do, you change as a person, or I hope you change as a person, and the book should be part of the documenting of that change. I have changed in huge consequential ways with all of my books. Every single time I can sit here and go through each of them and tell you how I have changed as a person. But yeah, absolutely. You change as you write these things, no doubt. Finally, Shave says, "Have you considered writing a children's book about American history?" I have not until today when I got this question. I don't know what that would look like. I get into some heavy stuff. I like to think that I could maybe do that. I don't know how I would do it. Maybe. God, now I'm thinking about it. Oh, it would be banned so fast. I mean, American Rule's already been taken off shelves. I assume the Midnight Kingdom has as well. I just haven't heard about it yet. Um, Speed kills. That is an old political slogan that says that like you need to be quick in responding to things. You need to be quick in order like to fight in the battlefield. Is what the idea is. Man, I don't know. I gotta think about this children's book. I don't. I have never considered it until right now. But something needs to be done. Like we need to stop giving over the space of like simplified um like, we gotta quit just handing kids the same stories because they have been meticulously created to go ahead and get them down the chute, sort of the scaffolding of learning basic American mythology, right? We gotta tell them about American exceptionalism. We gotta tell them about how to, like, fit within this paradigm, even if they're liberals. Like, they still have to believe that in American exceptionalism and this sort of scrubbed down idea. Yeah, Jennifer says, "I find it hard simplifying these topics when talking to my kids." I imagine. I think kids are really suspicious of the moment, and they're really suspicious of how things are happening. Um, I'm gonna think about this. I'm gonna think about how I would put together like, I think the answer is you have to imagine that your kids are smarter than what you're giving them credit for. That has always been the answer in terms of, how to write fiction for younger people, is always assume that they're smarter than what the age would tell you. I gotta think about that. I'm gonna give that some thought. Thank you, Shave. I believe that. Is it Schmave? Okay, I think it's Schmave. I thought it was Shave, but Schmave. I appreciate that question. I'm gonna think about it. On that note, I appreciated this. Thank you. The beard guy. My daughter, every time JYS is on my TV, ugh, the beard guy. How dare you? How dare? How dare? I'll be the beard guy. That's fine. I'll take it. I'll be the beard guy. Tell your daughter I believe in her. I think she's gonna make a better world. Maybe that will help. Maybe we will facilitate some type of of uh of a partnership here. Maybe. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. This did my soul good. I appreciate you all so much. Going through this together. We've been on this journey. Some of us have been on this journey for 7 years now. Good God, man. I mean, I've been doing these bourbon talks since the start of the pandemic. Is I think when I started doing this thing. But overall, we've been talking about this and doing this for years. We're gonna win it though. We really are. Somewhere down the line, we're gonna make a better world. I believe in that. We're gonna heal both ourselves, but also our communities and our society. I truly believe that. And I think we're going in that direction now. I know this is hard. Mention my podcast, the Muckrake Podcast, wherever fine podcasts can be found. Um, yeah, thank you again. We're gonna win this thing. We're gonna do well. We'll try and do this again here soon. I don't know about next weekend, but maybe the weekend after. We'll see. We'll see where we're at, but we're gonna do this more often, I think. I think that's what we're gonna do. I appreciate you all. Do not let the bastards get you down. Do not get demoralized. Do not feel like you are alone. You are not powerless, and you are not alone. Cheers. All right, everyone. Stay safe.